I'd like to call this meeting of the Clay County Commission to order. We will begin with our Pledge of Allegiance. If you would all join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Nolte?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Here.
That brings us to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion related to the approval of this afternoon's agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
Motion has been made for the approval of the agenda as printed. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
That brings us to public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on any issues? No comments from the public? Very good. Thank you very much. That brings us to our immediate action agenda. Administrator?
Thank you, Commissioners. First item for immediate action is, commission meeting minutes for October 5th at 3 p.m., October 12th at 6 p.m., and October 19th at 3 p.m. Also is Resolution 2022-408. It's approving invoices from November 28th to December 1st in the amount of $124,646.79, with 257 invoices being paid. Resolution 2022-406 is approving 2 change orders for construction of the Northeast 188th Street Bridge with Phillips Hardy Incorporated. The net of these change orders is actually a reduction in the contract of $9,122.47. Resolution 2022-407 is approving and signing the 2022 financial statement audit for the external audit engagement letter with Hood and Associates. And Resolution 2022-413 is approving the continuing education reimbursement request form.
Thank you very much. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments on any of the items listed on this afternoon's, immediate action agenda?
No questions from me.
No questions, thank you.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, is there a motion related to this afternoon's immediate action agenda?
Commissioner, I move that we approve the immediate action agenda as printed.
Motion has been made for the approval of the immediate action agenda as printed. Discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
That brings us to our regular agenda. First item on that agenda is 2022-404. Administrator?
Resolution 2022-404 is approving K9 Blaze retirement and transfer ownership to Larry Reeves. And Captain Agdarian is here to present information. And we would request that the commission take immediate action on this afternoon.
Very good. Please proceed.
Captain Amy Agdarian, Clay County Sheriff's Office. K9 Blaze was born on May 11th, 2016, and has been in service with the Sheriff's Office with her handler, Larry Reeves, since October of 2016. She has certified and recertified a total of 6 times through the North American Police Work Dog Association, and she's been deployed over 500 times throughout her career to locate narcotics, persons, and articles. She is 7 years old now, and she is trained to detect marijuana. And now with the changes in the marijuana laws that Missouri voters voted on recently, that skill set that she has is going to become kind of dated. And as she is getting to the upper end of a K9's working years, we are requesting that she be allowed to retire to her handler and transfer ownership and financial responsibility to Larry Reeves.
Would you like to make any comments at this time?
No, sir.
Okay. This is certainly a nice occasion. It's good to see the relationship between officer and K9 officer so strong, and they work together so much. It's certainly nice to see that they will be able to continue that relationship beyond the retirement years. So I think this is a very nice thing to do. It's very good for everybody all the way around. Commissioner Carpenter?
Appreciate the presentation, and he's a good dog, and we appreciate his service. And I'm I'm sure you're looking forward to getting to keep him. So, thank you to everyone.
Commissioner Thompson.
I would just like to wish Blaze a very happy retirement. After all the long years of service here for Clay County, I hope she enjoys cozy nights by the fire and some good treats and tummy scratches. I know I say this a lot with our dogs, but I hope she has the best, and she's always welcome to come visit us anytime.
Now, if, did I understand correctly that it was requested that we pass this evening?
That is correct.
Very good. Is there a motion from the commission related to 2022-404?
I'll make a motion to approve 2022-404.
Motion's been made for the approval of 2022-404. Discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
I think what we'll do is we'll stand at ease for a moment. We'll get some pictures, and everybody gets to pet the dog. All right, well, that was a very nice way to start our regular agenda. That brings us to 2022-409. Administrator?
Resolution 2022-409 is approving invoice payments for the prosecutor's office from November 28th through December 1st. The amount is $1,213.67 for 7 invoices. And we would ask that Commission approve it this afternoon.
Certainly. Is there anybody here that would like to make any testimony on that? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, I suppose, but I just wanted to make sure that if someone was here to speak on it, we extended them that courtesy. Very well. Any discussion from the commission? Is there a motion related to 2022-409?
Commissioner, I move that we approve 2022-409.
Motion's been made for the approval of 2022-409. Discussion? Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
I'm going to recuse myself.
Commissioner Nolte?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to the next item on our regular agenda. That is 2022-402. Administrator?
Resolution 2022-402 is approval of a sole source vendor with STL Software, and County Assessor Baldwin is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
What this is an approval for a sole source vendor of STL software. STL is who provides our software for our personal property software. And what this is a module for our new online system.
Okay, and it's a sole source, obviously, because that's the
Yes,
vendor we've been using.
that's what I didn't add is STL's also been a sole source vendor for 20 plus years for the assessor's office.
And I assume you've been happy with the product that they provided.
More than happy.
Very good, very good. Questions or comments from the commission?
No questions.
No questions, thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on 2022-402? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve 2022-402.
Actually, I think we're not really a motion, it's,
Regular consent.
yeah, I got a little bit carried away with myself. Yes, what we need to do is regular agenda for next week good for everybody?
I think regular makes sense, yeah.
Regular
Very
sign.
good. Then 2022-402 will be on next week's regular agenda. Sorry about that.
I'm just following you down the rabbit hole.
That brings us to 2022-412. Administrator?
Resolution 2022-412 is approving the Clay County Collector's Report and recommendations of tax sale surplus of certain parcels, and Collector O'Reilly is here to provide information about this.
Please proceed.
I thank you, Commission Administrator. 2022-412 is our recommendation for the Commission. Since a form of government change, we bring this now to you to have the treasurer distribute the 2021 surplus taxes and distributed them in Table 1. We have the surplus going to the school fund. In Table 2 that is attached, this will be in order of priorities. 3 table is there is nothing on this at this particular time. And Table 4, it is the recommendation of the collector that this be made a suit, a libel suit at the court for someone to decide which of the applicants has a priority to these totals. We have had extensive help from the commission, and we've had help from the lawyers, the council, and this is their recommendation also. They've gone through this also with us.
And this is, of course, an annual.
Yes, this is
Event.
a 21 surplus. This tax sale was August the 23rd of 2021, and this is surplus.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the?
No questions.
Very well. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this issue? Seeing none. This does not involve the expenditure of money, it's just the distribution of it. I'm comfortable with it being on consent, but it is a rather lengthy document, so if a commissioner would like that to be on regular, I can certainly understand that. So I'm okay with consent, but what are the thoughts of the rest of the commission?
Consent works for me.
Consent's fine.
Very well. In that case, 2022-412 will appear on consent agenda at our next meeting. That brings us to 2022-403, Administrator.
Resolution 2022-403 is approving a change order for the Northeast 112th Street Bridge Replacement Project with Decker Construction. Highway Superintendent Griffin is here to provide information.
Good afternoon. Terry Griffin, Highway Administrator. This is a change order for the Northeast 112th Street Bridge. It increases the cost of construction by $6,230 due to additional materials that were needed as well, and primarily it was the piling reached refusal at a lower depth than originally anticipated, which took more structural steel to put the pilings in.
Okay. Questions or comments from the commission?
No questions.
No questions.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this issue? Seeing none. 2022-403 for regular?
Agreed. Yep.
That's fine.
Very well. Regular agenda for 403. That brings us to 2022-405, Administrator.
Resolution 2022-405 is approval of a term and supply contract with Van Wall Equipment for greens rollers. This comes from the Parks Department, and Director Driscoll is here to provide information to the Commission.
Please proceed.
Mike Driscoll, Clay County Parks Director. We would like the approval of the bid for greens rollers and the term and supply contract to Van Wall Equipment Company. They are John Deere's local golf industry equipment dealer. They were the best and lowest response for the bid. And we would anticipate buying probably 2 more rollers next year to replace 2 of the older ones we currently use at the golf courses right now. Greens rollers provide several good benefits for the golf greens. They take some of the wear and tear away from the regular greens mowers. Probably use the rollers 2 or 3 times a week, and so it extends the life of the much more expensive greens mowers themselves. And they also provide several agronomic benefits like cutting down on the dry spots on the greens by sealing in moisture, making the surface smooth, and you have less scalping by the mowers. Just in general, a practice that is now found to be very beneficial for golf course greens. And we would ask for the approval of this bid and contract to Van Wall.
Very well. Are there any questions or comments from the commission?
No questions, but thank you for the information.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to comment on this issue? Seeing none, regular agenda?
Agreed, yep.
Very well. That 405 will appear on regular agenda in our next meeting. That brings us to 2022-411. Administrator?
Resolution 2022-411 is approving a grant application for Midwest National Air Center for ARPA funds from the state of Missouri Department of Transportation, and Deputy County Administrator Coons is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Donna Kuntz, Deputy County Administrator. Yes, we would like permission to apply for the federal block grant for ARPA funding through MoDOT's Aviation Division. It is in the amount of $59,000. There is no match required from the county for these funds. There are several things the funds can be used for, personnel, COVID-related issues, or equipment. And we are proposing that we use this funding to refurbish our third and last fuel truck.
Okay, well, it sounds like a good thing to do, and you know, the fact that we were able to get it pretty much without having to match any funds is certainly something of a gift. Any other questions or comments from the commission?
No questions, thank you.
No questions.
Very well. Is anyone else wishing to speak on 2022-411? Seeing none, since this is we're making application to receive funding, I'm thinking consent.
Yep, agreed.
Very well. 2022-411 will appear on consent. That brings us to, I believe, what might be our final item. Yes, on our regular agenda, that would be 2022 Ordinance 43. Administrator?
Yes, 2022 Ordinance 43 is an ordinance ensuring the ethical expenditure of public funds and a commitment to a thriving community through the requirement that entities and projects receiving or benefiting from public funds pay prevailing wage.
Very well. And I believe that would be Commissioner Carpenter, so if you would like to proceed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, you know, what we have before us today is an ordinance to ensure that we have minimum requirements on all contractors and subcontractors who are bidding on publicly funded projects. And the goal here is to make sure that we get the highest quality bids in that are providing the best conditions for workers and, you know, creating the best results for our taxpayers. And so, among other things, the requirements would include that bidders have not been barred from bidding on federal or state projects within the last year, that no owner has had their license revoked or suspended in the last year, that they haven't enforced a drug testing policy, that they show proof of employer-provided health care benefits and maintain minimum health care benefits as outlined under federal law, that they participate in a federal Department of Labor-approved apprenticeship program, that they graduate at least one apprentice in the last 3 years, that they bar the use of independent contractors or leased employees, that they be licensed with proper licensing authority, pay prevailing wages as determined by the Missouri Department of Labor, and that employees are 10-hour certified under OSHA, and that supervisors would be 30-hour certified under OSHA. You know, this is intended as what we have before us. You know, we've got another week here to make amendments, and I'm certainly open to that process of, you know, discussion and amendments and, you know, whatever we need to do to perfect it and make sure it's the best regime we have in place going forward. But I think it'd be, you know, a good thing for the taxpayers. There isn't any direct expense incurred from this. There's no need to hire additional enforcement officers or anything like that. It would all happen through the normal bid process in which anybody bidding would need to demonstrate that they meet these criteria. And, you know, we've got a lot of hard-working men and women who put their bodies on the lines every day to do these projects. And I think what we're trying to do in this ordinance is ensure that their employers are meeting some basic minimal standards to make sure that their workplace is safe and well-trained and fairly compensated. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and talk more about it.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't know if this would be a bad thing to move forward with and continue having conversations with here for Clay County. I want to make sure that as we sit here as commissioners and moving forward, especially under a new day is coming, you know, and next year we have a new set of commissioners coming in, that we probably should look at updating some of our standards and procedures and making sure that Clay County is a safe place, not only for our citizens, but for the people who come in to do work. And in light of some incidents that have happened this past year, this kind of weighs heavy on my heart, you know, and I want to make sure that we never fall into a situation like that again here in Clay County. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. I think that the thing is, we are talking about an issue that would have far-reaching effects, obviously. One of the first things I think about in this, especially as we are going forward with a new commission to be seated in less than a month, I think that this is the kind of an issue that we should have go before the entire expanded commission. I think that it makes sense because that way we are, what we're doing is we are making sure that everybody has gotten the most input possible. I don't know that didn't detect anything from the presentation. I certainly would be open to hearing it. I didn't detect anything that suggested urgency that it should be acted upon in this calendar year and prior to the new commissioners being seated. I think that I would certainly like to get their input. I had a couple of questions. One of them is there because I've read it through once or twice, I haven't really read it through as many times as I would hope to before we vote. And of course, as we know, this is not going to be voted on today. So is there a limitation for the size of the businesses that we're talking about? Is there because if we have a vendor who has, say, 3 employees or 5 employees, what is the size?
So it's a good question. There are a couple different sections between section B and C. And B makes clear that it's only going to be on projects over $75,000. C, I think I'm open to that conversation in terms of clarifying that we're only talking about larger projects over a certain threshold. You know, I do think there may be 1 or 2 folks here today to testify on this, and you know, I'd be look forward to hearing their thoughts on that. Because I agree with you. You know, obviously we're creating some rules for the bidding process here that, on the smallest of projects and the smallest of companies, may be burdensome, and so. You know, creating a minimum threshold is something I'm open to. I would love to, you know, hear more from others in terms of their thoughts on that.
As someone who has been for a number of years a sole proprietor, accounting for inflation, I've worked on projects during my career in the arts that would have possibly reached that kind of a threshold. And so that's one of the things I'm interested in. A sole proprietor is a very different kettle of fish. So I want to make sure that we're not making this a burden on the smaller businesses because they just don't have the bench. One of the things that has been very, I think, obvious, at least to me, over the course of time, is that additional regulation is almost invariably felt more severely with the smaller businesses. If you're going after, if we are talking about a regulatory regime on a smaller business, the number of work hours they have to and the resources they have to comply is much more limited than it would be for a company that had a much larger employee base and a much larger bench of people that they could draw upon. So that's something that concerns me a lot, is that we're not going to disadvantage small businesses and that we're not going to essentially scare them away a little bit because they might say, I can't do this. I can't go through that regulatory. Like I say, regulations are always tricky, especially when it comes to small businesses. And I'm glad that you're open to the idea of maybe establishing some kind of a threshold, because if it turns out that with the dollar threshold, we end up pulling in some sole proprietor or, 2-3 person companies, that would be too burdensome, and they might well just say, I can't work that overhead into my bid price. So that's something I think we should look at. Do we, because you talked about some of the things that you would like to see. At this point, I realize there's no real way of doing it without taking a much deeper dive in. So I'm kind of looking more for your general sense of it, and that is, of the vendors we are currently using, how many would, ballpark, maybe percentage, whatever, however you would like to quantify it, can you give us an idea of what your perception on how many are going to be who are currently falling short of that goal?
It's a great question, and I don't have a percentage to offer. Certainly, if anybody, from administration or procurement, feels that they could provide that number, I would love to hear that. But the truth is, I don't know. My goal with this, because I agree with you, if, we're just putting up a new piece of drywall or something like that, and it's a, 1 or 2 man shop, that's different than a lot of the projects we do, as we know, are multi-$100,000 or multi-million-dollar construction projects, bridges, et cetera, right? And so when we're talking about that size of a project, obviously you're talking about a company that has a number of employees to do a multi-million-dollar project. And that's really the goal of what we're trying to capture, is make sure that those would follow some of these basic guidelines.
Well, the other thing, and then I see we've got someone who'd like to comment on that particular point. One of the things when I was in the legislature that came up for debate was whether or not painting a room would fall under prevailing wage. That pushes kind of the envelope, as far as I can tell, over what was the intent of the people who originally put that together. So from that point of view, I think we would need to kind of get that kind of figured out. As I say, not just because we want to make sure we are getting accurate information, but so that we don't inadvertently create a chilling effect on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I remember all the debates. Is it new construction or is it just maintenance, and what category does it fall under? And look, lots of entities, will then play games, with that to try to qualify as one or the other. In part it is what it is, but also in part, like, I agree with you, the biggest projects are the ones that I think are the most important to capture under this, and whatever language that we need to add to clarify that, I am open to. That being said, I'm also looking forward to, like I said, I think maybe we'll hear some testimony in terms of other people's thoughts on it as well.
Speaking of other testimony, nice segue, I thought. If you would like to comment on the discussion where we're at that point, please proceed.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Leslie DeGroot, Purchasing Manager for Clay County. I just wanted to kind of help give you some numbers to think about. During the course of 2022, I believe we've issued 3 solicitations that have been two or three that have qualified as prevailing wage. And that doesn't, I'm not counting bridges, I'm not counting roads, I'm counting public construction as defined by the state on the Department of Labor website, what qualifies as prevailing wage. So on average, 2 or 3, maybe a year, that come through our office, projects that qualify as prevailing wage.
And about what qualifications are you referring to that they're hitting the threshold of, just so we kind of get a picture of that?
Any public works construction project that is estimated to be in value over $75,000 is a prevailing wage project. Any public construction on a public building that's funded and benefited by taxpayers is considered a prevailing wage project.
How does that work when it comes to, and by the way, I realize you may not have come up here totally prepared, so let me know if I'm going a little bit deeper than you're prepared to go at this moment. How does that work? Because Commissioner Thompson alluded to, and I think it was a good observation, the unfortunate issue that we had with one of our bridges. Would this also apply to vendors that we use to do some of our road work? Would that also fall under prevailing wage?
If it is a public works construction project valued over $75,000, then yes.
So even if you were like resurfacing a road, if it was a large enough vendor, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm trying to get the depth of this a little bit.
So my knowledge is based on the Missouri Department of Labor, and the statute for prevailing wage that defines a prevailing wage project. And so if there is a construction project on a public building or public infrastructure, that is valued over 75. There's prevailing wage laws apply, and there's a whole plethora of other additional requirements from the vendor.
So something like the remodel of this room, would that have hit that?
If it was valued at over $100,000 or $75,000, yes, prevailing wage.
And also the office remodeling that we have just experienced, which, by the way, I just want to say, great job. It looks very, very nice. And I think good job. So that was something else that I was kind of wondering is what it was limited to. Let me go ahead and turn it back over to Commissioner Carpenter. It's his
Commissioner,
ordinance, so if you...
I
Yes.
apologize. May I just interject something since you're getting on a legal definition? The prevailing wage law under Chapter 210 defines construction, which is what we're talking about, as construction, reconstruction, improvement, enlargement, alteration, painting and decorating, or major repair. So that's the term used in statute. So that's how it's defined.
Well, I appreciate that because that's something that's important for us to hear is how it, because obviously whatever we put together on any issue is going to have to fit within the framework that the state government and other higher levels of government might well do. But Commissioner Carpenter, this is yours, so please go ahead and chat with the witness.
Thank you. Well, I thought maybe our county administrator had something to chime in too.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted
Yes.
to add a little bit also to what our procurement manager, DeGroot, also mentioned is depending on outside funding also. So, for example, on our bridges and some of our major roads, we either get money from the state and that comes through the federal government. So we also have another layer when it comes to requirements in awarding contracts that we comply with those regulations when it comes to their interpretation of prevailing wage and what's required. So we currently do prevailing wage, I think as you've just heard, at $75,000 or above on public works projects. The thing that I don't believe that's included in here that we do not do is asking for some of the information that Commissioner Carpenter mentioned earlier about the training or about healthcare. Those are things that we normally do not get from our vendors. Now, we may get the training aspect in OSHA, especially if federal money is involved. Sometimes that is a requirement of accepting funds on a project that we ask more information from a vendor. So there are some additional things that we normally wouldn't ask, but when it comes to prevailing wage, this aligns with what our current practice is.
And that, I'll tell you what, I do want to make sure that you ask this witness, but that brings up a question I'd like to ask Commissioner Carpenter, and that is they will be they are being required to do things like provide health insurance and that sort of a thing. So it's not asking and then just noting the information, but it would be a requirement that they do it at a...
It would. In order to, win the bid, they would have to meet these criteria. Yeah.
So these are actual qualifications, not
Yeah.
just checking in. Okay. Did you have any questions or comments for the witness?
I don't, but thank you for the information. Yeah.
Very good. So when we're doing things like, I think these are things that need to be explored. When we're talking about, we're going to be putting together a training facility for the sheriff that's using ARPA money. So, Administrator, are you saying that is already in compliance with what would be asked for in this ordinance?
Well, certainly the price of that project being over $6 million, whether federal money is involved or not, under our own state law and our own purchasing policy, that would be required to have prevailing wage.
So that would be not really affected that would not affect this ordinance at all? This ordinance would not apply to that, I guess.
And if I read the ordinance, the proposed ordinance correctly, it also says that if there are requirements on the county to obtain outside funding, then they would not want to preclude or put a burden on the county to prevent us from getting outside funding. So I've read it that it would work in concert with whatever our outside funding would require.
Okay.
Well, and if I could clarify, in terms of would it affect, for example, the law enforcement resource center project. It wouldn't in that prevailing wage would apply already, so that is the case. But some of these requirements, for example, requiring the bidder to provide health insurance to their employees under, that wouldn't currently be required through the bid process. If this were to pass, that is one of several things that would now be required.
So that would be an enhancement on top of what is currently required.
Right, in addition to prevailing wage, they'd have to do that, they'd have to meet the OSHA certification requirements, and the other ones listed here. Yep.
There's also been some consideration, although we're at the extremely early stages and we really haven't started discussing it, but at some point, it seems logical that we will be needing to look at some sort of a facility to house detainees, because our jail is going to reach its maximum ability to serve the population as it grows. If we were to put together, just hypothetically, some sort of a bond issue or some kind of a mechanism like that may or may not involve outside funding, how would this affect that particular project?
I think the way it would affect it is that if we, did a bond, we would still go through a normal bid process, and in that bid process, anybody who wanted the job would need to prove that they meet these criteria.
Okay, so these standards would apply to that, and I realize it's a hypothetical, so I want to give you that caveat that, it is a hypothetical. I think it's probably likely, but so in that situation, the ordinance we're talking about would fully apply to that project.
It would, and I will say on the biggest projects like that, because you're talking, well into the seven figures on a new detention facility, right? And so I think those kind of projects are going to be the most likely that whoever is going to bid for that large of a project is most likely to already be meeting this criteria. Not necessarily, but I think those are where there would be the easiest transition. I think on the smaller projects is where you might have, smaller construction companies that may need to change in order to meet these criteria. But I can't imagine, that somebody who is doing a $20 million detention facility isn't doing things like providing health insurance to their employees and being OSHA certified, et cetera. But yes, they would have to do that if this were to pass.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of a project like that would require any number of vendors, although we would have certainly a person who would fulfill a role similar to a general contractor's role. But there could conceivably be different specialty, different trades that would be, companies that would be of smaller size. Clearly, a project that large would require a substantial sized company to do the majority of the work that we're talking about. But my concern is that how would that apply to maybe some of the smaller businesses that would come in and do some of the finishing work or some of the landscaping, that sort of thing, things that may or may not require a larger company, and maybe we could use a smaller vendor, and maybe that vendor would be a Clay County business. So I guess my concern is I would hate to see a smaller Clay County business not be able to participate because a larger outside of Clay County business was able to come in and fulfill these requirements, whereas they felt that it would not be cost effective for them to go through that process. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about on that. And also, obviously, I'm concerned about what that would do to the cost, especially on a high ticket item like that kind of a facility. A few percentage costs in addition would certainly add up to substantial money in a pretty short period of time. Does this, is it all public works, or does this also apply to projects that receive incentives from the county?
So Section B does address incentives-based projects, and lists a number of requirements if they are receiving, TIF type or tax abatement, TDD, et cetera, benefits. The reality is the county, and that would be if the county was directly engaging in those tax abatement deals, which, as you know, the county doesn't have much of a history of directly engaging in. It's mostly municipalities here in Clay County. But that being said, if hypothetically in the future, if the county were to start engaging with incentives directly, then Section B would apply to those projects as well, yes.
And the reason I ask that is, while you're right, there's not much of a history, I believe in, and I'm kind of going back in my memory here, so I'd want to check, but prior to my time on the commission, I think there were a number of Chapter 100 bonds that were issued. I believe it was somewhere in the Hunt Midwest properties. It was a tech company down there, and they were, I'd have to look it up. I'm obviously a little bit fuzzy, but it was one of the first things that I was confronted with when I sat in this chair, and that was financial incentives that were extended to that entity. The other thing that concerns me, and you're right, and now I'm glad you clarified, because, for instance, if there was a Kansas City TIF commission were to extend benefits, that would not fall under your criteria.
That's right. It would only be county incentivized projects.
Okay. So if we were to, and I'm thinking now of the 587 proposed project, if we were to, as a county, and again, I'm just exploring hypotheticals, if we were, as a county, going to extend Chapter 100 bonds, then that project would fall under a prevailing wage requirement.
That I don't know. Somebody else may be able to answer that. I don't know how the Chapter 100 bonds would affect it.
Did you have any opinion? I mean, I don't want to press you for an opinion if you're wanting to research that a little bit. I don't want to.
We can certainly research that. It's my understanding that all of the property of 587 is in the corporate city limits of Kansas City, Missouri.
They
So
are.
if there were incentives, I would anticipate the developer would go directly to the city, and that the county would not necessarily be involved in any economic incentives. But
The suggestion has been made about Chapter 100 bonds from the counties. I've noted that it was brought up. Obviously, I don't have the authority on my own to say yes or no, good idea, bad idea. I just acknowledge that yes, that would probably be a possibility. If that were a possibility, that would be something that would, if we were to decide that was in the best interest of Clay County taxpayers, that would then affect the funding, the budget for that project to go forward, and it could in a substantial way. So I don't know whether Kansas City would be requiring that anyway through their TIF. I don't know whether we would be requiring additional. The commissioner just mentioned that that if this were to pass in some situations, it would enhance the requirements. Would it enhance those requirements on a project like that to the degree that it would affect going forward or not? I honestly have no idea. But I think that's the kind of thing we need to look forward to. If we go forward with this and say that Chapter 100 bonds was on the table, they would be obviously much less attractive if we were to extend an incentive and yet on the other side of the coin we were to cause greater expenses that may or may not make it as economically viable to go forward with this. You kind of see where I'm going on that. It gives me some concerns that we are limiting where it is that we can, what kind of incentive. So it really, to a degree, takes a lot of those options off the table. We also have industrial development boards that are at the moment not being used. If we were to activate those, and if they had some incentives that would, again, I'm thinking, and again, I'm certainly open to information, but my guess is that would then trigger this particular ordinance and would require those be put in there. So I guess what I'm saying is, for the rather small amount on a 587 project that we would be able to incentivize with Chapter 100s, which would essentially just be tipping it in from not going forward to going forward, the addition of the expenses that would be generated by the requirement on the vendors might well not, would compromise that offset and may well jeopardize the project. So I'm a little bit concerned about that possibility. Again, we are talking a great deal in hypotheticals here, but we are also talking about an issue going forward that is going to be far-reaching. And so while none of us has a crystal ball, I think we need to play out each one of these scenarios as much as possible, because once it's on the books, it's on the books.
Just on that last point, I will, add that at any point that we would seek to, or feel that we need to change any of these provisions, we, of course, could do so. And so, this, it would be on the books, but, this commission can, as a body, at any time amend it. And so I think if down the line, if we were to find something was causing some kind of hindrance or preventing some large-scale economic development project, and it was deemed that some kind of carve-out or amendment should apply, I think we would have the ability to do that.
And are there any projects that are in the offing right now that this would apply to? And I'm kind of going back to the issue of trying to get it done in this calendar year. Are there projects out there? I guess I'm asking, is there something pending out there that we need to put this on the books to accommodate for, or is taking this up for passage or non-passage, early next year? Does it do any harm to do it, say, in February as opposed to December? I guess is my question.
Gotcha. Yeah, I certainly not. This isn't intended to affect any, immediate project or specific project. This is just about, bid projects going forward. In my view, that we would be following the same timeline and schedule that we always do, which is we've got a work session here today. Ordinance has been proposed, debate, and then a week to continue to consider amendments and that sort of thing, and then vote on it next week. So I'm not, my view is that it's not anything extraordinary in either direction in terms of, doing it in the normal timeline that we would normally do something like this.
I see some people are lined up to speak. Before we go to them, Commissioner Thompson, I didn't want to leave you out of the discussion. Did you have anything you'd like to add or any questions you'd like to pose at this time?
No questions at the moment. Thank you, Commissioner.
I think I see a gentleman in the back who seems to be wanting to make comment. If you'd come forward and identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. My name is Manny Abarca. I'm the Executive Director for the Fair Contracting Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization that does monitoring and compliance work, whether contractual or voluntary. I've got some packets for you if you want me to approach or hand it to staff, whichever you prefer.
Go ahead and hand it to staff.
Okay. I'll
and that
give
way,
you, I think there's 2 extras just for staff as well. So obviously, we're here.
Excuse me a moment. Would your testimony be aided if we had those packets in front of us at this moment?
Yeah, it would.
Give us a moment to get those
Sure.
distributed, and then if you would continue at that point, that'd be great. Thank you.
So my apologies as well, as I realize now there are no numbers, so I can't tell you to flip to page 7 and look at this or that. But all the information is meant really for you to refer back to as you make your decision.
Okay.
But some of the data in here are national figures. So we are a referral-based organization, and so Mr. Commissioner, to your previous question, the only thing that I'd say is I'm sure you have projects now where folks are hiding in the shadows or fearful of coming forward to talk about some of the challenges they may be facing with prevailing wage or Davis-Bacon, depending upon where they're at. And so the faster there's opportunity to rectify some of these things, the faster you're going to have some worker protections. And given the state, I think there's a lot of expediency that could be used here. I think the greatest thing that I can share is when you create a standard here or fair playing field opportunities, you start to narrow the opportunity for folks to take advantage of public dollars being used ineffectively. I have been called on job sites, one in Clay County, where I have noted multiple vehicles of multiple different states, and I know that the proposed development was meant to attract local developers. And I think to a previous question, I think some of these opportunities actually deployed correctly could mean that local contractors have more of an opportunity to play when it comes to bidding in the fairness process, when it comes to incentives, because a lot of incentives across the region are drawing in larger national contractors to come in because the incentives are so appetizing and there are no real guardrails. I have been on multiple sites, one in Platte County actually, that is a federal site that had undocumented workers that were being misclassified and underpaid and victims of wage theft. That has occurred within the last 6 months to a year. Unfortunately, when it comes to housing specifically, there are a lot of developers who are cheating the system. And it is because we don't have a fair standard across the board in a lot of these areas that create the requirements and the teeth that hold them accountable. So because of this, because of some of the federal dollars being drawn down, it was needed, or it was thought that we were needed to come forward. I want to draw your attention to some of the costs which are in these slides. The cost of not doing something is kind of what this refers to. 1 in 5 contractors commit federal tax fraud. They steal jobs from your local tax-paying businesses and local employees. The latest figures is $8.4 billion in tax fraud robs state and local governments per year. And these are folks who are paying folks under the table or subcontractors who are abusing the prevailing wage rate to receive the contract, but then aren't paying the workers the rate that you're paying them to pay. And therefore, you're diverting multiple layers of taxation opportunities for those workers because there aren't guardrails and protections that do the oversight. Evasion of local tax earnings, state and federal income taxes, Medicare, Social Security, cost shifting, right? So if one of these workers gets injured on the site, they're going to likely go to one of your subsidized hospitals to get the coverage that they need because they're not being provided the benefits that you're paying for, but the oversight is not there for those benefits to actually be executed. In fact, I have one case now that we're working on where they're being paid by a personal check, and in the byline it says, "These are for your benefits." And when I inquired to the worker what your benefits are, they said, "We have not been presented any benefits." And so these are the ways that folks unfortunately skirt the processes when there are no guardrails. One element as well, 39% of families of construction workers are enrolled in one or more safety net program at a cost of almost $28 billion per year. These types of protections allow for a defined benefit to be specific to these job sites by worker class. And so you are creating a standard that says you must be this and you must pay these things. So there is no negotiation, really. They know the basis. And the worker becomes educated. And the subcontractor becomes aware of what the requirements are from the general contractor. So outside of the taxation component, the worker protections, this also creates an opportunity for your local contractors to fairly bid equally, right? As you're talking about fair and responsible, the opportunities become very clear and evident when you get to select, is this a national contractor that's coming in to bid on this job, or is this a local person who you know and trust to be effective in their work through prevailing wage projects? There are some unintended opportunities here that you curb a undocumented workforce as well. I have been on multiple job sites, and so far I have found undocumented workers at every job site. Federal, prevailing wage, school district, county, city. I found undocumented workers being taken advantage of, some of which are ghost employees. So this is an opportunity for us to leverage the effective methods to oversee the compliance structure as well. It creates a fairer standard across the board for workers, for subcontractors, and then it creates the opportunity for general contractors to work through the owners like yourselves to be effective stewards of your tax dollars. So I'll stop there. You have a full and robust PowerPoint presentation. This is actually one of our training formats that we use. Happy to answer any questions that you may have. I will say in closing, the Kansas City Fair Contracting Alliance is a regional organization. We have and continue to work with cities, municipalities, school districts to navigate some of these issues. And then myself, I'm a school board member, have been for the last 3 years on the Kansas City Public Schools, and am a Jackson County legislator-elect starting January. So I understand the position you all are in, and we'll take on that burden next year. So thank you for the time. Happy to answer any questions you may have about our organization or the work that we're doing.
That's an interesting point you made, the last one, excuse me, that you are commissioner-elect. By the way, congratulations on that. And it kind of goes to one of the original points I made. So we're talking about far-reaching policy. would you be in favor of the Jackson County Legislature going forward with far-reaching policy, even though you are about to take office? Would you want, as commissioner-elect, would you not want the opportunity to weigh in on an issue that was this far-reaching, is the only word I can think to use?
I wish that they would have done it before January. I know that they're in discussions now to navigate through the general counsel process to talk about implementation, and it sounds like it may happen, unfortunately, in January, not because of trying, but just because of the natural process of them wanting to budget. But because of the projects that are being proposed now, whether it's the jail, new Royal Stadium, we'll see about that, some of these things could be protected under these provisions. And I think, in fact, Jackson County is going a little further than these protections. So.
But I mean, as far as in your position, would you not want to weigh in on a far-reaching policy decision for want of a month? So, I mean, would your preference not be to make because you are the most recent elected official,
Sure.
or soon to be, so therefore, to a certain extent, you're the one who has got the closest ear to the people.
I would have hoped they would have done this 10 years ago. So I think the sooner the better in this situation to protect some of the workers, the contractors, and even the general contractors who are being affected by the subcontractor work. So I would gladly allow the current legislature to solve this so that we can move on about our business and fix some of the other problems that we have.
Even if it meant that policy initiative would fail?
If that's what it means. I think there are opportunities to always go further in some of these things. So if it comes back with a different version, I think that too can be beneficial.
The other question I have is it talks about penalties, and we're talking about, and I am not sure if this applies, so I'm kind of apples and oranges here,
Sure.
so certainly point that out if I'm doing it. In your presentation, you're talking about penalties with imprisonment time for those who violate. Are we talking about, and perhaps I'll ask you and then I'll ask Commissioner
Sure.
Carpenter, in this ordinance, I assume, are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
Does that include imprisonment options for those who might be found guilty of infractions?
I think that's dependent on the prosecuting attorney as to what level, because I will tell you right now, I have a case where 6 employees are owed over $70,000 of wages from a contractor who's repetitively doing this to folks. So at some level, I would assume the compensation alone does not go far enough to impede this. I've also seen contractors who will rebrand themselves, right? So Manny Abarca Painting Company gets caught, I go out and call it Abarca Manny Painting, and I come back and do the same thing. And so at some level, there's going to have to be penalization beyond just punitive and monetary. If they're truly bad actors who are taking advantage of these systems and the people, I mean, that could be an option that the prosecutor exploits.
Okay, so yes, Commissioner
Well,
Carpenter.
if I may, thank you. You know, if you look at the last page of the proposed ordinance, there's nothing about jail time. It simply says that if a bidder or subcontractor willfully makes or willfully causes to be made a false, deceptive, or fraudulent statement, or willfully submits false, deceptive, or fraudulent information in connection with any submission made to the county, they shall be disqualified from bidding or working on all county projects for a period of 3 years. So it's a 3-year ban. You know, no jail time.
And that was kind of where I was going when I said I might be doing apples and oranges here. That's why I wanted that, because the document that you gave us is essentially a broad look at prevailing wage, whereas
Sure.
Commissioner Carpenter obviously has a much more specific a proposal that he is presenting to us today. Something that you said that I was kind of curious about. You had said that this actually makes it easier for smaller businesses to participate. How so?
So it creates a fair playing field in the dictation of what the costs are. So a lot of times what we see in prevailing wage processes, when you go the cheapest option, you have folks who know what the prevailing wage rate is, know your hour amount, they'll quantify that and say, actually, I'll do $50,000 less so that I know that I'll get the job, knowing that I'm going to squeeze the subcontractors and the workers at the bottom end. So they'll have people work off the books. When you may have a fair person who's right across the street who knows we're going to present for prevailing wage, we know the the cost, we know what we're going to pay. By creating fair and best, you then can create the opportunity to say, well, actually, this person has been disbarred 3 times, and this is their 4th year. They're back now. And so you're creating the opportunity to track some of this work that's going on and some of the infractions that are having, so that you can create a fairer process and allow for those local folks to come in. By making sure that you're including the incentive organizations, you're actually discouraging some of the national firms who just take the Walmart model and come in and replicate, take advantage of your tax incentives, and then after 10 years move on. You're discouraging them that because you're requiring them to pay at a certain level. So we have seen this work across the nation, and I guess that's what I should have also shared with you. So the Fair Contracting Alliance is a part of the National Affiliation Organization. We have affiliate groups. They're a little different structure than we are across the nation who have modeled some of this language. And the organizations that we work with, or the entities like this government body, we kind of propose opportunities for what you can and can't or shouldn't use, and present an a la carte menu for you to pick what's best for your communities, versus just giving you a model language of saying do this and only this. We want to make sure that you all know what's best for your community, because I don't, you do.
And what is your experience in smaller businesses?
Smaller businesses in which?
Small businesses, in other words, I understand that you've got experience in certain areas. Not everybody can have experience in every area. I've had a small business. My brother had a small business. He was in the trades, and he had a small business. Had like 5, 6 employees.
Sure.
Now, obviously, when we're talking about these projects, we're talking very large ones. He may or may not have been able to participate, but potentially he could have been one of the people who would have maybe participated in one of the smaller parts of that.
Yeah.
I don't see how it would have helped him. I don't know. I do know actually that. As far as compliance regulation, he didn't have a compliance officer the way a large company would. He didn't have a staff lawyer. He didn't have, it was basically him and his wife and some guys, and I think they did good work.
Sure.
He had a good reputation for that. I'm struggling to see how this would actually, I'm willing to listen to the argument that certainly it would maybe hold him helpless, although I think it would make it more difficult for him to compete in a regulation-rich environment. But I fail to see how that would have actually benefited him and caused him to be able to successfully bid and do work on some of these projects.
Well, I can say that the prevailing wage standard itself sets the market rate for your wage. So an interesting tidbit. So we went out to a rural school district 45 minutes east of Kansas City, and we inquired about the prevailing wage rate. Now, they had some issues there. They did not set a rate. They did not have an understanding, although they're legally responsible for. But in fact, they were paying over the prevailing wage rate that was within their jurisdiction. And so in that situation, I would say actually the smaller contractor can predict what their costs are going to be to predict their income off that contract. And so that's an area where I think it's very beneficial. In terms of the compliance component, in fact, I work with subcontractors more than I work with kind of the general contractors, because just as you described, they don't have a compliance officer. They're not checking the regulations. They're being told, build that wall, and they go build it. The reality, though, is how many workers are on that site? Are they building a wall? Are they laying tile? What are they doing? The classification is something that I think a compliance structure would actually benefit them for, because instead of them hiring someone, they can rely on the city or the county in this situation to do that oversight and ensure that they're following the proper requirements. My job is not to turn people in. I want to try and rectify these issues before they close, because the alternative is I call the Department of Labor, we call the state DOL, and they come in and mess things up, slow the project down. My job is to try and come in and work and navigate these challenges, rectify any problems that may exist, and go about the business of the job to complete it. So I think those are two opportunities that a small business subcontractor could benefit from this. They just know what they're getting into from the beginning.
So if a small contractor was under investigation for violating some of this, whether, obviously under investigation does not draw a conclusion of innocence or guilt, but they're just being investigated, that small business does have to defend themselves in that instance, which could easily eat up their profit margin.
It actually, so when we levy lawsuits on behalf of workers, or the worker really is the one who has the lawsuit, the subcontractor is responsible, the general contractor, and the owner of that project. And I think one of the slides in there talks about the public cost, the public trust costs when you have, and I just worked with the local school district on this, you have an undocumented worker who's not on a wage, an hour sheet that is missing and being paid under the table. Now, if that were to get out into the public narrative, what does that say about your construction ability and your governors in that situation? What is your liability as an entity? And so in some ways, these things help curb that. And in some legislation, I don't think this is one of them, you start to put that liability on the general contractor because they ultimately have the responsibility beyond just the county or city to oversee some of that stuff, because you're entrusting in them when you hire them to do the work.
Well, I appreciate the point you're making about workers not legally present and available to work in this country, because one of the things that came up years ago that I worked on was I ran into a number of small businesses, and their problem was this. And I don't want to get off onto a different tangent, but just because the undocumented workers have been brought up a couple of times, so I feel that it's appropriate. And what was happening was you would have an employer of a small business, of a trade, and they would do their best to pay the best wages they could. They tried to do good quality work. They tried to give benefits to their workers. They were trying to follow all the rules. However, their competition, somebody, let us say, less scrupulous or less interested, was hiring people illegally present. They were being paid poorly. They're getting no benefits. It was just dangerous. But the point that I took away from that was the individual who had that business was in fact being penalized for doing the right thing, not only complying with the law, but doing his best to provide his workers with the best pay that he could manage. However, when you're in the bidding process, obviously that is a problem. And I realize you're talking about prevailing wage. I don't know if the issue of undocumented workers is being covered in this particular ordinance. Is it, Commissioner? Is it, Commissioner?
Well, they would have to demonstrate that they are licensed correctly, that they've never been barred or suspended in the last year. They would have to show proof of employer-provided health care benefits. So there are a number of ways in which I think it gets at that end. I would let Manny speak to any more specific ways, though.
Yeah, and inherently in the compliance structure, whether that be through the state or the Department of Labor, you're going to have to require some E-Verify efforts. And I know some ways that have gotten around this are using like the Missouri Highway Patrol background check as opposition. Well, if you're using a fake Social Security number, that's kind of hard to get through to that and see that that person is undocumented. So that is one element of it, and I agree wholeheartedly that when you have someone who's cheating the system and undercutting on what they're paying the worker compared to someone doing their best, paying prevailing wage to keep a good set of employees, there is no competitive advantage, right? And so I think these types of protections help that scenario to ensure that these standards are in place, that you're not going to see that level of violation and abuse. And if you do, the penalizations will bar them from the process in the future. So those are your accountability measures, I think, within this legislation that helps you. The debarment is critical here, and I would say it is an element that is unique currently in the process. There's not a system that I'm aware of locally that monitors who is being disbarred outside of the state, but that no one really gets disbarred from the state. You're not seeing that type of collection of information to then check back when you do the next project. So that is an advantage that your legislation has.
Of course, the thing is, a local government, even state government, does not have the authority if they should detect someone who is illegally in this country working. No government, no state government, no local, no city government is competent to assess either a fine or jail time on that particular thing. So that's perhaps why it wasn't specifically outlined.
Yeah, but you can't hold the owner of that construction company accountable by not allowing them to bid on your projects.
Well, that's already in state law.
Yeah.
Because I know because I wrote it.
You wrote it, yeah.
Yeah. So what would be would the enforcement mechanism strictly be worker complaints?
So we're a referral-based organization because that allows all levels to talk to us about what's going on. And we've had many levels talk to us. We've had owners complain. We've had subcontractors complain. We've received a lot of complaints from workers directly about the abuses that they see. And it's usually around compensation. You know, I was promised a paycheck. They promised me a paycheck after I complete this one and go on to the next job. And so that cycle begins to get old after a certain amount of time. And now that we are in existence, a lot of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce referrals have come in that way. But we get local organizations that say, hey, we have a subcontractor who's been cheated out of a city project. They've been bumped out because for one reason or another. And we go in and talk to them about, well, what are the obligations that they had? What are the commitments? We navigate bureaucracies to bring folks to the table when maybe they couldn't, to avoid litigation. Because that benefits no one really. And so we've been fairly successful so far in doing that, a lot more successful in the compensation of workers, because I've only been in my position since April of this year, so my tenure here is relatively short. Prior to that, I was a congressional staff member. So the bureaucracies can be slow, which is why legislation like this is necessary and important, because you all are a tighter, lean organization and can do things a lot faster than the state DOL or the US DOL.
Let me go ahead. I don't want to monopolize time. If it sounds like good, I'll go ahead and have Commissioner Carpenter take up the discussion from here, and then I'll go to Commissioner Thompson for any questions or comments that she may have. So, Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'll keep it. First of all, thank you for the information. You know, super helpful. One question I do have in terms of creating a $75,000 threshold, you know, the same thing that would apply under prevailing wage. Currently, I don't think the way that the ordinance is written under Section C, I don't think it explicitly states that we're only talking about $75,000 and larger projects. Do you have a view? And that's where we apply the responsible bidder provisions, as opposed to Section B, which talks about incentivized projects. Do you have a perspective on whether or not adding in a $75,000 threshold, you know, the pros and cons?
Yeah, I think that it helps define exactly what you're looking for and sets a bar as to above and below, right? I actually had this discussion this morning with our school board, as they said, oh, it's just a smaller federal contract of $5,000. And I said, yeah, but the fine is about $2,500 for each violation. So in what way are you wasting tax dollars if you're not going to comply here? And so, you know, they understood that. But if there's a clear line that you're drawing, I think that helps staff probably more than it helps others, and clearly articulates to the contractor externally, these are our expectations.
So excluding projects, for example, under $75,000 from the provisions of the responsible bidder language here, you don't see any significant downsides to doing that?
If you're saying excluding ones under it?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that if you're using any tax dollars, that this is advantageous to that.
So you would advocate using it for any size project, regardless of how small? And so in your experience, have you seen on a smaller project, perhaps you have a smaller company that may be less likely to currently meet some of these requirements?
Sure.
Have you seen that being, you know, has that been an issue for smaller companies?
Yeah, so this was an argument that school district I had mentioned before used against us as well. Maybe they can't afford to pay a prevailing wage rate. And I said, well, do you have an interest in using a localized workforce? Well, of course. Well, how much are you willing to pay the parents of your school district? Because that's what you're talking about, is your tax base. Are you willing to raise their standard of living to ultimately benefit the county, the city, the school district, when the way that they're paying taxes? And so I think it's advantageous personally to have any public use of dollars to have that rate and these requirements, because you're raising the level of the playing field and expecting more from the workers you're getting. And in return, you're going to have a level of training and requirements associated with that provides a level of safety and protection against liability going further. Because as Commissioner Nolte had mentioned, an undocumented worker being used on a site may not be as skilled as someone who's used to this trade for a very long time. And then that lends to safety issues down the road. I've also seen in situations at the Kansas City Zoo, for example, where a prevailing wage contractor from out of town came in, are starting to bid on work that is outside of their scope. They got the contract and they're squishing insulation to a point where it's useless. Well, now you've wasted the resource of the wage that you paid that person to do it. You've wasted the material you used to do it, and the length of time that that's going to be worthy without repair is shortened, right? So you've added 3 levels of waste on your tax dollar, and you patted them on the back, and they went back to Florida. So all of these levels of protection create levels of protection for you and the asset to the tax dollar, or the taxpayers.
Thank you. And then on the participation in the Department of Labor apprenticeship program, you don't have to be a union shop in order to participate, is that correct?
Correct.
And have you found that non-union shops also participate in that program?
Yeah, ABC's, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, I'm not affiliated, I'm not union, non-union. That's one of the benefits of our organization is we are a third party. We work with both.
Gotcha. I just want to make sure that, we're not inadvertently requiring a construction project to be union and by requiring the participation in the apprenticeship program.
The apprenticeship component actually allows for smaller businesses to participate at prevailing wage levels lower than your common wage for a journeyman or something like that. So it is actually an advantageous addition that could be beneficial to that smaller company.
Thank you. And again, thanks for the information.
Sure.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, yes. Can you tell me about some of the surrounding cities or municipalities or counties that are currently using this form, moving forward with their practices?
Yeah, I think locally it's hard, and one of the reasons why I think I exist to some degree. So I can tell you who we're exploring these discussions with now that could be helpful. Obviously, Jackson County being one of them. Kansas City, Missouri is the one who has adopted language around wage theft and fair bidder language. But currently, Grandview, Lee Summit, North Kansas City, and I feel like I'm missing 2 or 3, Independents are all considering similar protections, but their outcomes and teeth are differentiated, right? And so we've heard that, well, we can't do internal compliance. How do we set that out in a third-party contract? Okay, we can talk about that and how some of the ramifications of catching people in the act can actually support your compliance structure. Some have just outright said, we want you to do the investigation, we'll do the teeth component of it. And so all are at different levels of discussion at this point. This would be a discussion that is ongoing for several folks. We've not crossed the Kansas line yet, primarily because the state law is different there than it is here. But we plan to do that in the future.
Right. So I guess my question for anyone who has actually had this implemented already, have they gone back, because nothing's set in stone. This is something that if we move forward with in a couple weeks or in a couple months, we could always come back and amend it and make it, we could shape it to work here for Clay County. Have you seen that done? Have they adopted their language and their ordinance and then come back and tweaked it and refined it? Have you seen that?
What I think the gravest circumstances that have occurred nationwide, and these are some of my colleagues' stories here, is if you adopt a compliance structure but no actual monitoring or oversight of that, you don't get participation, you don't get the implementation of what your intent was in the first place. So even if it's a small level of monitoring and that compliance side, that is better to show you the results of what you're trying to accomplish with this.
Great. And I guess I have one more question.
Sure.
So my aspect on this is really, I want to make sure that Clay County is a very safe place.
Yes.
This is going to help make sure that we don't have bridges collapsing
Yes.
forward in Clay County.
Absolutely. Your level of standard for requiring workers to be present is going to be raised with this as well. I think there's a couple different prongs of benefit here, but the expectation is a higher level of safety. I'm not saying that this will end all be all protect everyone, but it is a standard that then you can look at as oversight to ensure things like that unfortunately don't happen as much in the future.
Have you seen a reduction in on-site tragedies and incidences with the places that have actually adopted an ordinance?
Oh yes, and I've heard these incidental stories from workers directly at the front line, right, as they're saying that the expectation on prevailing wage and overseen processes dictate a level of standard of requirement that is consistent and not in these windows of, we know the inspector is coming on Thursday, let's be dirty until Wednesday night and Thursday morning it's clean. This allows for some of that oversight to be ongoing and the expectation that, look, it's just easier for you to play by the rules than it is for you to try and figure out how to cheat the system. So without a doubt, for workplace safety, for the worker level, you have significant benefit here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Commissioner Carpenter, do you have any follow-up comments for this witness?
I don't, other than, thanks for being here and providing the information. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anyone else present who would like to speak on this issue? Okay. One of my concerns is that it is going through rather quickly. The question I have, though, before I start to go down that road is, it seems to me that one thing that might be helpful in this would be a start date within the ordinance, because if someone has already I assume that somebody's already started the process of applying to work on a project, changing the rules on them in midstream is kind of a tough pill to swallow. One of the things that I would suggest possibly is having a date set so that it's far enough out to where people who are building and constructing their bids around this existing circumstances aren't kind of thrown a curve. So that might be something that would be another way to approach this.
No, that's a great point, and honestly, not even a thing that I thought about. So I appreciate you bringing it up. I would certainly be comfortable saying if we've already put it out, to bid prior to the passage of the ordinance, to carve those out and only have it apply to future projects that haven't been put out to bid yet. I don't know if opinion from county administrator or counselor, if they've got views on that, but.
The other thing that I wonder about, was there any, did that elicit any comment from the council or administrator? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I didn't pass that up in case you wanted to put something in. Do you?
I was just going to say, if you, certainly whatever your direction is that's in the ordinance, we will comply with that. So.
Thank you. The other question that I would have is, we have ongoing contracts. We talk about them all the time. Would this be rolled into those particular projects as those contracts were being renewed, because we have a number of vendors that we have that are on call, so to speak?
My view would be no, simply because these requirements are agreed to in the bid process. And so if they've already been awarded the bid, then we've already entered into a contract with them that didn't ask them to meet these requirements. So I can't imagine going back and trying to impose these on them.
So I'm thinking in terms like term and supply type contracts. So, okay.
Yeah, I think my view would be, and I'm certainly open to anybody who feels otherwise. My view would be this would only apply to future bids.
Okay. Well, that's a reasonable approach. Do you have any other comments before we, Commissioner Thompson?
I don't, thank you.
This is complicated issue, there's no doubt about it. We've been given, I think, a good presentation, some good information from the witness. But two things occur to me. One is that this is a complicated and far-reaching policy that I think bears more than the usual discussion. We've had there was a previous issue that came up this year that we had up for discussion a couple of times before actual ordinance was introduced, and I think this is of a similar character. The other thing that occurs to me is that it is, because we are talking about long-term policy, I think that the public is well served, and I believe it is a sign of respect for the incoming commission to put this off until we have our full group of 7 commissioners to speak to this, to ask their questions. Some of them are here today, and while they certainly are free to ask questions and speak as any other citizen, it is a very, very different type of conversation than if you're sitting up here behind on this particular side of the desk. I would make a motion that we table this issue until 2023, when we have our full complement of commissioners present and they are able to get their information, and then we would be able to cast a vote as that newly constituted body. So with that, Mr. Counselor, if I am correct, making a table of motion is a privileged motion?
Yeah, that's correct. There's no further discussion, and you vote on that motion.
And so that motion would now go to a vote, and that would be a vote that I would only vote on in the case of a tie.
Correct.
Just want to make sure we had all our T's crossed and I's dotted. Therefore, okay, I will restate my motion, and that is that this issue be tabled until 2023. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter,
No.
Commissioner Thompson,
No.
Very well, the motion fails. I'll go to close. I mean, this is obviously not a consent issue. I think if there's one thing that we can all agree on, that is not the case. I'm certainly going to be willing to listen to the remainder of it, but based on those on the reasons that I've given, if this comes up at our next meeting, it goes for a vote, and should it prevail, I will not be signing it. I will defer to the pro tem to sign it. I feel that it is sufficiently bad policy to pass long-term legislation on the very eve of new commissioners, and in fact, a majority of commissioners. It feels like we're kind of sliding this in under the wire, which I don't think is in the public interest, and I don't think it is good public policy. With that, Commissioner Carpenter, I will go ahead and go to you. Well, first off, any other remarks, Commissioner Thompson?
No, Commissioner, it's for, I agree that this is not a consent issue today. I agree completely. But I do appreciate us being able to have conversations and just talking about it. And I look forward to continuing to have conversations, even next week. And that's the whole way we get anything done here in Clay County, is just by having open dialogue and working out the kinks in it. So.
And in spite of the fact that we're not going to vote for right now, I do want to go to Commissioner Carpenter, because this is not the usual kind of issue, and I'd like to go to Commissioner Carpenter for closing remarks, and I think it's a given that we will be putting this on regular agenda. But please,
Yes, thank you.
Do the closing remarks, and then we will move on to our agenda.
Thank you. Well, first I just want to say I appreciate the discussion. I think it was, it's been good and healthy to have. Obviously I think we've got a different view on it. I don't think it's bad policy. I think this is, maybe one of the best policies that the county's passed in a time that'll benefit a lot of people, a lot of hardworking people in this state. So I look forward to having the discussion again next week. We've got time to offer any kind of amendments or changes over that time. Just want to follow the normal schedule that we always follow on these kinds of proposals. I'm not trying to shift things one direction or the other in that regard. Pertaining to the work that we'll continue to do next year with the expanded commission, obviously we will have every opportunity as a commission to make any changes in this realm that we want, and any commissioner will be able to propose any changes that he or she wants, and we can have a vote on those at any time. So I don't think that this in any way precludes a future commission from acting in either direction. And so in the same way that we're crafting important policy right now, like our $100+ million budget, et cetera, I think that we have our role to play, and I appreciate working with both of you to do that, and look forward to the discussion again next week.
Thank you very much. With that, is there a motion related to the items that we heard on our regular agenda as far as their distribution between the regular and consent agendas?
Commissioner, I move that we put the following items on next week's consent agenda: 2022-412 and 2022-411, with each of the remaining items. Well, I'll just go ahead and state them because a couple we passed today. Let's put 402, 403, 405, and Ordinance 43 on next week's regular agenda.
Very well. Motion has been made to distribute the items that were heard on today's regular agenda to the consent and regular agendas for our next meeting as outlined by the Commissioner. Discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes?
That brings us to discussion items. We have 2 items under discussion. Let me see. We've been here for a few moments. I think what I would like to do is to take a break. It is right now roughly 25, 28 minutes before the hour. Let's stand at ease until, let's say, 20 minutes before the hour, and then we will return and we will take up our agenda with the discussion items. So with that, we will stand at ease until that time. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'll enjoy it. I know. I have the disease where like your extremities get colder.
Good, I told her to let's get together and okay. What's up, Chief? How are you? Grade me later.
obviously, if you need to be here, I'm not gonna be able to go home and come back. Obviously.
Tim was over there talking to me all the time.
Okay, great. Oh, we also have our minutes to sign over too. I would like to reconvene this meeting of the Clay County Commission. We took our little break. As usual, I was inaccurate in estimating our time, but we are back. That brings us to number 8 on this afternoon's agenda. That would be under discussion items. We have 2 items to be discussed. The first one is presentation by the assessor, Mr. Baldwin, and the collector, Ms. O'Reilly, on 2022 taxes. If you would like to proceed.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Tracy Baldwin, the Clay County Assessor, and I'm also a Clay County taxpayer. I was elected in 2020 by the citizens of Clay County to do the job of the County Assessor. In January of 2021, I took the oath of office, which states, I, Tracy Baldwin, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Missouri, and I will faithfully demean myself in office to assess all of the real and personal property in the county which he resides at what he believes to be actual cash value. I take this oath very seriously. My first slide is already up there. This is statute 137, section 115, subsection 9, which states the assessor of each county and each city not within a county shall use the trade-in value published in the October issue of the National Automobile Dealers Association Official Used Car Guide, or its predecessor publication, as the recommended guide of information for determining the true value of motor vehicles described in such publication. The assessor shall not use a value that is greater than the average trade-in value in determining the true value of a motor vehicle without performing a physical inspection of the motor vehicle. For vehicles 2 years older or newer from a vehicle's model year, the assessor may use a value other than the average without performing a physical inspection of the motor vehicle. In absence of a listing for a particular motor vehicle in such publication, the assessor shall use such information or publications in which the assessor's judgment will fairly estimate the true value in money of the motor vehicle. Now, I kind of want to give a background of how we got to this area. In January of 2022, I sent out letters, our normal letters of reminders to fill out your assessments before March 1st. In this letter, I explained to taxpayers that I was going to attempt to freeze the values due to increases that were coming. Within days of sending this letter out to the taxpayers, I was notified by the State Tax Commission that it was against the state statute, which was historically at the assessor's discretion, but the new written statute would be against that, and I'd not be allowed to freeze values. So in turn, well, you can't read this letter, but I do have copies of this letter. The second letter that I sent out was to notify the taxpayers of this statute, the 137-115 subsection 9, and describe to them that I would not be able to freeze the values and I would have to increase the values based off the statute. I do have copies of this too if anybody would like one. After that, we did our last certification in September with the new value increases. At that time, my chief appraiser of personal property requested from the State Tax Commission to provide us with a statement of why values increased at the state level. And by the way, I want to throw out there that this is in every single county in the state of Missouri. And I do have letters, this is in my next slide, the letter from the State Tax Commission, and I do have actually copies of that everybody would like one. In closing, I would like to remind everyone that Missouri is a self-reporting state. We do have to rely on what information is provided to us from the taxpayers. If any of the taxpayers ever feel that there's an error, I recommend please come to our office and we'll be an assistance to correct that. If any personal property can also be appealed as well, like real estate property. You can appeal those values. A personal property is a little different. You can appeal that value all the way up to September, I believe. And you could call us, come in, send us pictures if there's, for instance, if there's damages or you feel that there's high mileage for the vehicle. All this information is on our website. We do encourage anybody that if they don't have a computer or don't find what they need on their website, always come to our office and we'll be happy to help. With that said, we have approximately 130,000 personal property accounts. So just please be patient with us. We have about 10 staff members that handle all the phone calls on the personal property side, so we do get overwhelmed. Unfortunately, there are longer wait times than we expect, but we do also have set up to where you can leave a message, you can email us, and there's even an online chat with our new online system. My staff, I have a staff other than the ones that are on call answering the phones nonstop. I also have staff in the background that are answering those emails and voice messages every single day, and I welcome any of you that you can come witness that. We have staff every day trying to keep up with those calls. The one thing I want to point out before I finish, I would like to remind everybody also when you get your tax bill to look in the top right corner of that and see where this money goes to. I will be here for questions now and then after the meeting, and my door is always open. So if anybody would like to come to my office at any time to ask any kind of questions, I'll always be available. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions you need.
Commissioner Thompson, do you have any questions or comments?
I only have one question, and I know the big topic of this week is the tax bills were late going out. And it's my understanding it's no fault of the county that this has happened. Is there anything that the county can do moving forward in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen?
Well, that would be a best suited question for Barbara O'Reilly, the collector. But if you look at the timeline, we certify our values, and when we send it to a former clerk, we send it to the clerk. The clerk sends it to the taxing entities so they can set their levies. Levies are set and are due by October 1st. After October 1st, the collector gets that information back, and they do very well of getting the information back out, but you know there's going to be a couple days turnaround to get that information, and then it goes to the collector, and the collector then in turn has less than 30 days to get bills created and sent out. So to move those dates is going to require legislation, and you know, we have always tried in the past. Unfortunately, I did hear there were some issues with printing and things like that. But we've always done really well of trying to get those out as soon as possible. And, you know, we'll continue to do that. So,
thank you.
Commissioner?
No questions, but thank you very much, and thanks for all the hard work you and the folks working in your office are doing.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the collector like to join the, I'm sorry, were you? I want to make sure you were finished, Mr. Assessor.
Barbara O'Reilly, Collector. As you can see, we had trouble this year. We started in first part of August. Oh. Yeah. We started the first part of August with our print vendor and to find and give them timelines when we would need our envelopes, when we were going to do our printing and have our amounts to them. As you can see here, this year, they went to the printer on the 3rd, last year the 9th, the year before the 28th, December the 1st was the deadline for mailing. We did not get them all out until the last 1,900 were out on the 2nd. I checked this morning, and of those 1,900, just real quickly, I found that approximately 250 of them are past due bills that did not have 22 values on them. They are like from 18, 19, and 20, those that have not been paid. And that was just a quick guesstimate. I'm sure there's more because of the numbering system in them. We have to re-enter everything that the assessment department gives us for every transaction. And today alone, we had, before noon, we had 954 transactions that we had completed that the assessment department gave us on issues, address changes, new setups, conversions, et cetera, et cetera. Whoop. And, whoop, sorry about that. And we have to replicate, like I said, everything that the assessment department gives us. We have to wait until everything balances, and we have it in a test system, and then we put it in production. So it takes us quite some time. We have the software provider do a lot of conversions, and this type of thing. I don't have the total number. The reason the dates are not on the printouts is because we have a postal code. That way we bundle them up to save money, and it saves us lots of thousands of dollars every year. And that's why there's no postmark, because it goes through the post office with the permit number. I don't know what else to say. There's not much else. You know, we tried. We only have 8 in our office, and I think we do a lot.
Approximately how many statements do you mail out in the course of a season?
Probably 250,000.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm getting at is obviously the best of all possible worlds is that they go out, you know, on the schedule that you would like to see them go out, but we're talking about a pretty massive mailing.
Yes, sir. And the fact that they are online. As of the 3rd day of November, they were online, and I believe the state allows us to only make them available. I do not think there's a state law that requires us to have them in the mail, now that we're a charter.
So as far as you're aware, it is compliant with state statute.
I believe it is, and I believe council had looked into some of that too, that it says that it is just to be available. Is it?
The best reading that I have of the statute is that we're under an obligation to send a statement to the taxpayer. And historically, typically, that means mail a statement. That also means that, however, there's an amendment to the statute that allows it to be electronically provided to the taxpayer. So it can be done electronically.
So we may well be in one of those situations to where statute has fallen behind the technology. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's always the case when it
Yeah.
comes to statutes, unfortunately, or maybe that's more of a statement of how quickly technology is moving. But yeah, this is a small problem, easily fixable, and I think most of the anger that is coming from taxpayers is probably about the amount of the bill as opposed to the receipt of the bill.
My sense of it is you've probably got a good feel for what some of the concerns are. Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, thank you. I know that there's been some discussion on extending the deadline past the December 31st at midnight. Is that something that are we going to be able to do that, County Councilor? Is that an option for
So
us?
there's not a statute that specifically empowers.
Could you speak a little bit more in your mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's not a statute that specifically empowers the county commission to extend that deadline. The statute does, however, say that the bill cannot be delinquent until 30 days have passed. So logically, if by the 31st, if 30 days have not passed yet, the date is extended. So I would think the best reading is that we pick the date that makes the most sense, and that is the date. But, you know, in this case, I think it's just a matter of 1 or 2 days, really. But I do think that as a policy matter, we should set a date that makes sense, because I think the statute certainly supports the idea that it can't be delinquent until at least 30 days have passed.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that our citizens aren't going to be, penalized for this. And if it's I don't believe that there's anything wrong with the process that the county is doing. I think it really was a vendor problem. And that's why I was like, if there's something I didn't know, like if there's something we need to look at to see. But I've worked with Barbara for years, passing on the tax book and getting things moving along. So I just want to make sure our citizens are being taxed fairly and making sure that they don't have any extra money added on to that if they don't need to have that added on. So whatever we can do to help them out.
So if I can interject, in discussions with collector, because of the 19,300 statements that were mailed on Friday, December the 2nd. And so there was discussion about, well, then that isn't 30 days before December 31st when they are due. And so there was discussion about providing an extension on those particular statements to be accommodating to those individuals. But the challenge, as Barbara indicated, is there's no postmark on the bill. And so how would a resident know, a property owner know, do I get the extension or do I not? And the only way they will know is, which is what we put on the slide, is the only way for them to confirm that they have the extra time because they were one of the 19,000 is to contact the county.
And we have them all designated on the system, and we have them set up that they can pay late, that they will not be penalized.
Good.
Yeah, the absence of
All
a
19.
postmark does make it a little bit more complicated to make that distinction, certainly. Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you. Could we, do a Tuesday, January 3rd extension just across the board for everyone? Are there downsides to doing that? That way everybody would be guaranteed to have gotten the full 30 days. I mean, it's not much of an extension, but it would at least guarantee that we meet the statutory obligation.
I suppose if it may.
I think twofold. Number one, I think certainly on advice of counsel, yes, you have the authority that you can do that based on certain circumstances. I think because it is somewhat convoluted for our residents to know, do I get this extension? I've heard about it, do I not? And then if they are not eligible, we'd hate for them to be penalized. So I would recommend, if there's an extension, that it be somewhat granted across the board. We can do a press release on that, because then I think it takes out that ambiguity of, do I qualify, do I not qualify? And I think that would make it, easier for our residents, our property owners, and also for staff also. To be consistent across the board for everyone and give them, I think you might want to put a time on January 3rd. Do you want to go to midnight or midnight? Okay, so if that is the commission's desire, we can make that happen and then get out the communication. We have a reporter here this evening, so maybe they can also help us with an article besides our own social media announcements, if that's the commission's desire.
Yeah, and certainly in terms of exactly which day, obviously we can have the discussion. Tuesday the 3rd would be the sort of first business day, because my understanding is Monday is technically
Martin Luther King Day, isn't it?
well, it's New Year's. It's the day after New Year's Day, but it's the first business day, so I think it's treated as
The
as
county
a
will
holiday.
be closed.
So if we were to do Tuesday the 3rd, I think we could guarantee that we're meeting whatever statutory obligation we have here with regard to the things going out a day late, and it wouldn't. It seems like to me it would be an easy enough thing to do. So if you all are comfortable with it, I would suggest maybe we do that.
I think that's a good suggestion to make. I think I know the answer, but I'll ask the question. That does not affect the cash flow of any of the entities getting the tax monies. It does not appreciably inconvenience, for lack of a better way to put it, those recipients of those tax monies. We're talking about a few days. I can't think that would necessarily be an impact that would be terribly harsh, fall hardly on them.
I think that's correct. So just so everybody understands the calendar, the 31st is actually a Saturday. So that would be the last, so there's no transfer of funds that's going to be happening. So the first is a Sunday, the second is the observed holiday. So the first business day back is the Tuesday. From a functional standpoint, I don't know that it matters if it's the 31st or the 3rd. It's the first day back.
So there would be no appreciable impact on the taxing entities.
I would think so.
Yeah, that'd be my observation, unless the collector has a different take
I
on
don't
that.
believe it would.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I would also like to point out, if this is truly a goal of the commission, that we be very specific, that this is an extension on your 2022 tax bills. As Collector O'Reilly mentioned, there are some taxpayers that have not paid their 2020 or their 2019, and so that those penalties would not be impacted with this extension, would not apply to those.
In the interest of expedience, is this something that would require a vote of the commission, or is it sufficient for us to have a consensus of the commission and instruct staff to go forward on that? Would that be an acceptable route?
I would say both. I would say give consensus to staff that that's how we're going to put information out to the taxpayers, and then we could have a pretty simple resolution to that effect ready next week. We've got one ready now. We could, if you wanted to do it now, but it hasn't been noticed up. So probably the simplest thing to do would be to have us, we'll put it on for immediate action next week, but between now and then, we will start getting that messaging done right now.
Does that reflect, because I agree with Commissioner Carpenter's take on it, is that reflected in the document you have, or would that require some additional work?
The draft resolution had different information and a different date, so we'd like to redo that. So if you tonight, this afternoon, could just make a motion, you're directing us to do that, we'll bring the formal resolution back next week, but it allows us to start getting that communication out to our taxpayers.
And I'm assuming that it is the consensus position of the commission that we also include, as the administrator suggested, an indication that this is a one-time deal. It's just for 2022 and does not affect, for instance, back taxes or any of the rest of it. So I'm sure that you folks can put together that language. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Do we want to go ahead and do a vote, or how do you want to go? And we could just do the vote at the next meeting?
I'm comfortable with the consensus to staff that that's what we're going to do, so the messaging can start, and then consensus also, or direction, that we'll have a resolution ready for you next Wednesday for immediate consideration.
Just to close the loop, so that is acceptable to the commission?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yes.
Very good. Then, do you have all the information you need, Administrator, to go forward as far as instruction from the commission?
We do. Thank you very much.
All right, very good. Is there any further discussion that is required of this issue? Okay. Thank you very much. In that case, we will go ahead and move on to our second discussion item. Administrator?
Thank you, Commissioners. This afternoon, our second workshop on the proposed 2023 budget is before you. As we had indicated, our goal is at these workshops is to do a deeper dive on our larger operating funds. And this evening, the presentation is on the Law Enforcement Fund. Okay. Mike and I both can't play at the same time, so I'm sorry our technology is not quite working tonight, so I'm going to try first to flip the slides, and if not, then I'll ask Mike, who is the man behind the curtain, to advance the slides for me. But so today's agenda is to talk about the Law Enforcement Fund itself, but we also have some miscellaneous law enforcement funds that support the operations of the Sheriff's Office. So we'll talk about those. We'll talk about the revenues and expenditures, and we'll do some budget highlights and additions for the law enforcement and the Sheriff's Office. And then we'll certainly talk about, again, review the budget calendar. So this slide is actually, and it's probably very hard to read, I apologize for that, but this is the organizational chart for the Sheriff's Office. This is actually reflective of the most recent restructuring that Sheriff Aiken has done within the department. There are 225 full-time positions in the Sheriff's Department, along with 10 part-time positions. This actually represents 40% of the countywide employee population are located in the Sheriff's Office in the Law Enforcement Fund. This chart gives you some historical context of budget to budget to budget. So you'll see here the operating adopted budgets for the Law Enforcement Fund for 2020, 21, and 22, along with the proposed budget for 2023, that is $25.4 million for the Law Enforcement Fund. This has grown since 2020 to the proposed 2023 by 24%. It's also important to know that the Law Enforcement Fund itself represents 22% of the total countywide operating budget for 2023.
By the way, I think something else that is worth noting, although you can only go back so far on your information, and that was for a period of time preceding 2020, there were certainly some disturbing issues revolving around the Sheriff's Fund. I think this is a truer reflection of how those funds have gone, because those were, I hope, and I'm confident, were outliers, and we are back in I think, a mode where we are understanding that the sheriff needs a certain level of funding, and I believe we're on that path. But I just wanted to interject that.
No, absolutely, and certainly a little bit before my time, I certainly understand what you're referring to, but the 2020 numbers do actually reflect the additional funds that were added to the budget as part of some of those settlements with the disagreement with prior commission and the sheriff's office. So
Correct.
Trying to compare apples to apples as we've come forward since 2020. So this particular chart talks about the revenue stream and where does the funding come from for the Law Enforcement Fund. So the pie chart on the left identifies the different funding revenue sources. And so you'll see kind of up to the top right of that is called the Law Enforcement Sales Tax, which represents 19% of the revenue for the Law Enforcement Fund. This is the 1/8 cent sales tax that was renewed by our citizens to support the law enforcement, and specifically all of that sales tax, other than that has to go to the TIF revenue, goes into the Law Enforcement Fund for the sheriff's operations. You'll also see then that the general sales tax represents 35% of the revenue stream. Now, this is part of the general sales tax that is assigned to the Law Enforcement Fund, as we've talked about in prior workshops. And then the other large major revenue is the general fund transfer, which we talked about last week when we talked about the general fund. And that's 32% of the revenues. So looking at the general sales tax and the general fund transfer, that's 67% of the revenues for the sheriff's office. If you then add in the special law enforcement sales tax, it should be noted that 86% of the revenue to operate the law enforcement fund comes from sales tax. That's important to know because that's certainly the economic environment that we find ourselves in can have an impact on the revenues available for all our operations, and specifically certainly in the law enforcement fund. In addition, you'll see a small revenue from the TIF transfer in. We've talked about that before. You'll see that in this and future presentations where we have had an excess fund balance in our TIF fund, and so we're reallocating. It's a one-time transfer to various funds, and so there's a small amount that comes back to the law enforcement fund. We also have 4% of their revenue comes from prisoner boarding, and then we have our miscellaneous 9%, which is grants and other miscellaneous income that is provided and included into the law enforcement fund. So over to the right, you'll see sort of the historical actual data for you. We are comparing all the sales tax, the law enforcement sales tax, you've seen that. And the far right is the 2023 proposed amount, along with our 22 estimate, and then the actuals for 2020 and 2021. You'll also see then what has been transferred, or excuse me, not transferred, but directly allocated from the general sales tax to the law enforcement fund. And then you see the general fund transfer, which continues to increase on an annual basis to support the operations of the law enforcement fund. And the final major revenue stream is the prisoner boarding. And I do want to draw your attention to that because it looks a little odd. You'll see that the 2023 proposed is $1 million. 2023 estimate is certainly not that high, nor is 2021. 2020 actual was above 1 million. And so what you're seeing in here is what we believe is the impact of COVID. And due to COVID, there were less state prisoners that were actually housed at the detention, and so that impacted our revenue. So we do believe, we're forecasting for 2023, that we will go back to sort of pre-COVID operations when it comes to housing state prisoners and receiving revenue for those services. Yes?
No, I'm going to finish your sentence. I did have a question, but please finish your sentence. I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
I'm done.
I noticed that on the, under the law enforcement sales tax and the general sales tax, which obviously the revenue sources is the same dollar being spent and the same sales tax being collected. On the 2020 estimated under law enforcement sales tax, there's a difference between that and the 2023, which is certainly understandable, but it looks like it is an identical number on the general sales tax between 22 estimated and 2023 proposed. Is there, can you kind of expand on that?
That is correct. So when we sit down to balance the budget, the first thing we started with, as you know, and we talked about it last week a little bit about looking what happens with our general sales tax. And so some of it stays in the general fund, others of it we allocate to other funds such as law enforcement, road and bridge, parks. And so where we start is, what did we do in this year's budget? And that was our starting point. So yes, that amount we decided to keep flat for the starting point of allocating general sales tax. But, you know, we could have increased that, which meant then less money stayed in the general fund and the general fund transfer would have been less. So again, to some degree, sales tax, other than the law enforcement sales tax, all comes from one pot of money. It's just really how we allocate it.
And if let me restate that just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. The law enforcement sales tax obviously goes exclusively to law enforcement, therefore it's not have any sub-allocations, whereas the general sales tax could in fact be affected by other demands in other parts of our budget because it's parsed out in a way that is yet to be, well, not yet to be determined, but it's going to have to be done in how the situation unfolds.
That is correct. You know, as we said, we fund some of our general sales tax to other funds to help start with their base operating budget. And so as those needs continue to go up, just like law enforcement does in our road and bridge fund and our park fund, then the general sales tax has to go there, or the general fund has to transfer more monies.
I just kind of thought, but I wanted to make sure I had the correct end of the stick on that one. Thank you.
So how are we spending the $25.4 million in the law enforcement fund? So the pie chart on the left identifies it by category. And it's not unreasonable, but the largest category of expenditures in the law enforcement fund is personnel. 81% of the budget goes to personnel. This is for our commissioned and our civilian personnel in the sheriff's office. It takes people to operate and in the detention facility and to patrol our streets and make our county safe. So it is the largest category of expenditures that we have. 15% is contractual, 4% is commodities, and less than 1% is capital. So the chart on the right kind of gives you, again, historical information of what has been the actual by category for 2020, the actual in 21, our estimated for 22, and then what we're proposing to spend in 2023. So I'm going to talk a little bit, especially about that far column, the 23 proposed to our 22 estimate. And so you can see, I'm going to skip down and talk about contractual commodities in the 23 proposed budget is higher than in 22 estimate, and this basically is reflective of inflationary costs to do business. But I want to spend a little time kind of talking about the personnel number. So personnel in 2023 is budgeted at $20.4 million. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that particular number. Just as we talked about with the general fund, how we budget personnel is for every position we budget for the entire year with all its benefits. You'll see that our estimated in 2022 is $18.4 million. So there's an increase in 23, number one, because of funding positions, vacancy positions for a full year. And also, we'll talk a little bit later about the implementation of the sheriff's pay plan. But I'm going to draw your attention, remember back last week when we talked about the general fund, there was a much larger number between our estimated payroll personnel costs in 22 to what we were budgeting in 23. It's almost like over $4 million difference. And a lot of that is attributed to vacancies. Well, I'm certainly here not saying that the sheriff's office has not had vacancies, because they certainly do. But operations in a 24/7 operation is different than operations in all our other departments. So for example, all the vacancies that we've had in the general fund, the park fund, yes, we have staff that have picked up and added additional roles and responsibilities to fill those gaps. Or some services we have not done, or we have modified services that we've done in those operations. In a 24/7 operation, such as the sheriff's department and the detention facility, we don't have that, right? We still have minimum staffing that has to operate the detention facility and minimum staffing that has to be on the road. And so what you find is our current employees are filling those vacancy gaps and those minimum staffing positions with overtime. So while they have had vacancies in the sheriff's office, you're not seeing as dramatic of a savings for those vacancies in the budget and the estimate, because we're paying overtime to fill those positions so that we can operate successfully. So that's part of the difference in how you look at from a 24/7 operation to some of our other general operations that we don't have to really bring in staff to pay overtime for. But in addition to the law enforcement fund, there are some auxiliary funds that are available to the sheriff for operations. And so what you see here is a list of all the other funds, either by statute or requirement, that we keep separate allocations that are available for the sheriff in operations. So there are 11 different small funds where those resources are available for operations of the sheriff's department. And then also, the second one there listed is capital. So we are using some of our capital funds for equipment and facility improvements for law enforcement. And so that total for all of the auxiliary is a little, almost $2.7 million. So when you take that along with the law enforcement fund budget, we're investing a little over $28 million for law enforcement. And that actually represents 25% of the countywide operating budget across all funds, all organizations. It does change the pie a little bit on the right side about how we're spending the $28 million. So personnel goes from 81 down to 73% because we're adding capital components and some of the other things that these auxiliary funds are helping to fund in the sheriff's office. I want to talk a little bit and highlight some of the additions that are being proposed in the 23 budget for the sheriff's office. The first one is the implementation of phase 2 of the sheriff's pay plan. Phase 1 was actually implemented in 2021, and then in 2023, we're proposing to fund the second phase of his pay plan structure. What this does is certainly address workforce pressures, increases starting salaries, and deals with compression issues. So the current starting salary for a deputy is $41,080, and the sheriff's new plan raises the starting salary to $45,000. But what that also does is allow funding to address our existing personnel to deal with compression issues. If you increase your starting salary, then you want to be able to also increase your salary for your existing personnel. So that is also factored into this funding that comes out of the law enforcement fund. We're also recommending to fund out of the capital fund $580,000 to replace road patrol vehicles. Probably 10 vehicles will be replaced. Now, typically, in the sheriff's office plan is, you put them in and you put them out on the road. Those 10 vehicles from the road will then be rolled down into other functions within the sheriff's office, so that by the time you're done rolling everything down, out of the sheriff's office will come the least desirable 10 vehicles that either have the highest mileage or certainly high maintenance costs associated with them. We're also recommending out of the capital fund to do the sheriff's radio replacement program. So you see here that we're recommending to do portable radios for field personnel and also the Stalker 2 stationary radar. We're also recommending out of the law enforcement fund $100,000 to relocate physically relocate our dispatch console and equipment to the new consolidated facility at Gladstone. We're recommending, and we talked a little bit about this last week under facilities budget, they kind of overlap, but $50,000 coming out of the capital fund that will replace doors in the detention facility with pass-through window capability that increases security for our personnel. And certainly, recently the Commission has approved ARPA funding for the Law Enforcement Resource Center in the amount of $6.9 million, which increases the training opportunities for the sheriff's personnel. And also we have the opportunity to reduce some soft cost expenditures with reducing travel and training. And that's an overview of the Law Enforcement Fund and the auxiliary funds. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. That's very informative. I'm not sure if it's in this particular fund or not, but something that is an issue that we will be having to deal with going forward involves more of the technology, and I'm thinking in terms of storage for the body cam videos. Would that be covered in a different part of the budget than we were just addressing?
Yes, that's correct. It's actually in the 5-year capital improvement plan, so it is not proposed for 2023, but it is, you'll see that in our last workshop where we talk about the 5-year CIP, and so you'll see that identified. Although I am asking the sheriff's staff, Amy's here, if we can continue to look for outside funding, because that is a very large investment and expense coming forward, and so we'd like to maximize our local resources and tap into any outside funding we can find for that project.
And the reason I mention that is because I assumed as much, but the reason I mention that is because this is a liability that's out there, and the more we can talk about it, think about it, the better. When we originally instituted the body cams, we didn't have as much discussion as I would have liked related to data storage. I don't think it was appreciated by any of us, quite frankly, at that time, just exactly what kind of a potential overhead we were looking at for the storage of this information and the obvious security that it has to be kept under. So while it's not to do with this particular part of the budget, I just like to keep it front of mind because that is something that we don't want anyone to be surprised at, because we will have to deal with it in one way or another.
You're right, and we will talk about it with the 5-year CIP. If I recall, the original total cost projected is around $1.8 million. Now, in discussions with the sheriff's staff and IT, we believe that we can do that over several years, and so we don't necessarily have to do a 1.8 one-time year capital outlay that's spread over a couple of years. So we're continuing to have that dialogue about how we can make that happen and be as efficient and responsible with our dollars as we can be.
Thank you. Like I said, I realized it was not really quite on subject, but on the other hand, to make sure that, and we of course have a couple of commissioner-elects here, so I think certainly to make sure that they are as aware as possible as we go forward, I think it helps to a general educational process on some of these funds. Commissioner Carpenter.
No questions. Thank you for the presentation. Very helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
No questions, but thank you so much for putting this together this week, and I am very much enjoying our presentations on the budget.
I would go to the next slide if I could, Mike. But again, I want to talk about the calendar and what's coming up. So we are here on December 7th for the law enforcement fund. So next week, we'll do a little bit of the same thing, deeper dive with revenues and expenditures for the road and bridge and the park funds and those capital funds that are tied to those particular functions specifically. December 21st, which will be the last meeting of the year, we will do the 5-year CIP and the budget forecasting and what that looks like. We'll do a recap on January 4th with the new commission. And then just to remind everyone, we've kind of had a date out there of adopting by January 11th, but to remind everyone, the budget has to be adopted by January 30th. We also have a public hearing notice requirement, so we will need to pick a date for adoption of the budget so we can make sure that we meet those public notices for our public hearing. So, and then with that, again, if Mike could go to the next slide. Again, we encourage everyone to be engaged with our budget process. Again, there are different ways to do that. You can go online at our website. This presentation will be out there. Also, you can go to YouTube and watch this presentation. Also on our website is the full budget with all the detailed information. And certainly, we're posting some information on Facebook about what's in the budget and trying to engage our citizens to become involved with it. And certainly, if they have any questions, we have a specific email address that will go to the budget support team so that we can answer their individual questions. And certainly, we want anyone to reach out to us if they have any questions about the proposed budget.
And January 30 is the actual statutory date. Yes. It varies. The first year that I came onto the commission, I believe it was like January 26th. So there's a formula in state statute, but the 30th is our drop dead deadline.
I believe it is. I'm looking at the counselor, but I think it is. I think it is.
And what day of the week is that? Just out of.
That might be Friday. Monday.
Okay, good. So we would certainly want to handle this in the previous Wednesday at the latest.
At the latest, yeah.
It would be prudent.
Right.
No, that's great. Just for informational purposes, for those who may be watching and are wondering, on years when we have an election, because there's a prohibition in statute from lame duck commissioners casting votes on upcoming budgets. Happily, we don't have that issue this time around, but the idea is that we will do our budget in January. Next year, going forward, we will, because it is not an election year for the commission, our deadline will be end of year, end of January. That, again, will be a date specified in statute.
Yes. That is an interesting component of the state statute that you don't have, we try not to be like the federal government where you operate in a year that doesn't have a budget. So normal practice is you would have your budget adopted before the year begins, but there is that glitch in the statute that says it happens in January.
Well, in interest of not extending this meeting into the wee hours of tomorrow morning, we won't go into the contrasts and the things that we do differently than the federal government. I think we just suffice to say we have our ways. With that brings us to county administrator's comments. Administrator, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just one item, the meeting schedule. So the next meeting of the commission will be a business session next Wednesday, December the 14th. It is at 6 p.m., and we apologize on the agenda. It says 3 p.m., but it will be at 6 p.m. next Wednesday here in the chambers.
Very good. That brings us to commissioner comments. Commissioner Carpenter, do you have anything you'd like to share with us today?
I do not. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
No comments, thank you.
The only thing that I would like to observe is that this is, of course, December 7th, as President Roosevelt noted, at the time of day that will live in infamy. So certainly, I think one positive way to remember this date and the events that took place is to express our appreciation to those men and women who service both in uniform currently and who have in the past, and most certainly those who made the sacrifices that are certainly an example of was the December 7th attack on Pearl Harbor. So with that, I would just say, please keep our servicemen and women in your hearts and prayers as we go forward. That concludes commissioner comments. That brings us to recess and adjournment. We are